The island is unstable. There's possibilities of further eruptions.
At least 5 people are dead, 8 others reported missing on a small New Zealand island that was hit by a volcanic eruption. It was a chance to see a geological marvel up close that turned into horror. White Island is a popular destination for tourists, and as Laura McQuillan explains, authorities are now ruling out finding any more survivors.
Scenes of panic on a tourist boat off New Zealand's White Island as the volcano erupted, shooting clouds of hot ash and toxic gases. Dozens of people were on the island at the time. Boats rushed some to the mainland. For others, there was no escape, too dangerous for rescuers to try to reach them.
The island is unstable. There's possibilities of further eruptions. The physical environment is unsafe for us to return to the island.
New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealanders and foreign tourists were caught in the eruption.
At this stage, we can confirm that amongst those currently listed as missing or injured are New Zealanders who were part of the tour operation and tourists from Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, China and Malaysia. That is to the best of our knowledge.
But police don't believe anyone else survived.
5 are deceased, 31 are currently in hospital. A further 8 are still missing and 3 have been discharged from hospital.
Authorities will send drones over the island today to establish whether it's safe to send teams in on foot, but they caution that it's not a rescue mission, it's a recovery.
The helicopter pilot, as I understand, physically moved around the island rather than just an aerial survey, and did so for some time, and so brought back that report that unfortunately there was no sign of life.
Laura McQuillan, CBC News, Toronto.
A large fire ripped through an industrial plant in Schaumburg this morning, forcing workers to evacuate nearby businesses. Smoke could be seen billowing from the roof of the aerospace metal finishing building around 5:30. That's on Proctor Road near Highway 27 and Highway 9. The west side roof of the building collapsed entirely. Hazmat teams were called in because of a concern about toxic chemicals inside the burning building.
We don't know exactly what's in there, and that's why we're treating this as an extremely serious situation right now, and we're asking people to stay clear of the area while the firefighters determine exactly what it is that's inside their burning.
2 commercial plazas were evacuated as firefighters worked on the blaze. A strip of nearby road was also closed. No injuries were reported. We've all received the calls from someone pretending to be from the CRA to another person asking you if you need your ducts cleaned. Now, those scammers are going to have a harder time getting to pick on you. The CRTC just announced a new technology that all cell phone providers are going to have to install to protect consumers. Nellie Nanowski has the details.
Most people think twice before picking up a 1-800 number, but this number looks like it could be coming from someone you know. Still, if you're like me, you're going to send them to voicemail to see if they leave a message to figure out if this call is coming from a friend or a foe. Today, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission announced a new technology that's supposed to make that process easier. It's called Stir Shaken.
What it will do will be able to authenticate when you're receiving outbound calls. So if you receive a call from someone who could potentially be a spammer, you'll be able to see and determine whether or not it's fake.
All of the big providers like Bell, Rogers and TELUS are supposed to have Stir Shaken in place by September 2020.
You will be receiving that call with an authentication saying that this is a legitimate call or not. So it will be seamless to the consumer receiving the call.
Is that really going to stop anyone from getting those calls? Because I get about 5 a day.
I know, that's the perfect question. So, in my opinion, I don't think it will stop. First of all, spamming is a global phenomenon. It makes billions of dollars. So even if this protocol does work, I'm sure they'll find another way to infiltrate and spam people.
For consumers like Nicole Gombe, the new regulations are far from enough.
I think ideally the people who are doing this should be found and should be charged, but I'm not sure to what degree.
It makes it even more difficult since those calls are often coming from overseas. Another unknown, the cost.
What I'm afraid is that the cost of that will be passed on to the consumers.
No word yet from the big 3 if your cell phone bill will go up. Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Toronto.
It appears a one-day strike by some Ontario high school teachers will go ahead on Wednesday as the union and the government are still far apart in negotiations.
They have not made a move since they tabled their first request many months ago, and I think that's unreasonable, and parents want us all to be reasonable. So I think we're confident in the way forward, obviously, and we're going to continue to negotiate the table in good faith to get a deal.
The union representing public high school teachers say they are waiting on the province to table a deal. This weekend, the OSSTF said they would postpone Wednesday's strike at certain school boards if the government met certain demands like reducing class sizes, eliminating e-learning courses, and a compensation hike in line with inflation. It doesn't look like the province is budging on those issues, so prepare for school closures Wednesday at several boards, including the Toronto District School Board. Meanwhile, Ontario's elementary school teachers will begin a Work to Rule campaign tomorrow, halting field trips and other services. The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario says it will be starting the second phase of its Work to Rule campaign on Tuesday. Along with affecting field trips, teachers will not be sending letters home or collecting money for school-based activities. Police are looking for two suspects after shots were fired at a tow truck driver in a Markham parking lot last night. The suspects fled, but their vehicle was found this morning. Kelda Ewan joins us live now with more. And Kelda, the shooting is believed to be targeted.
That's right, Dwight. Police say that it's too early at the moment to speculate exactly what the motive was, but they do tell us that there is an ongoing tow truck turf war in this area. They also say that they have no doubt someone out there knows who was responsible for the shooting, and they are urging them to come forward. They also say that the shooter had his head covered with a black balaclava, so it is making it a little bit difficult to identify him. Now, the shooting happened inside this GO commuter parking lot at around 8 o'clock last night. Two tow truck drivers were parked beside each other in the lot when a white Ford pickup pulled up to them. A passenger then got out and started firing at one of the tow truck drivers. The tow truck driver tried to speed out of this parking lot, rammed into the suspect vehicle, and eventually ended up in a ditch. The suspect vehicle, meanwhile, was last seen fleeing south on Highway 404. That vehicle, a white Ford F-150 with no license plate, was found by Toronto police abandoned in the area of Don Mills and Steeles this morning. Police are now scouring it for evidence, and it was found riddled with bullet holes.
Not certain exactly how that might have occurred. Obviously, it was a bit of a sort of a scramble in terms of the vehicle trying to flee. So it may have been a case of the suspect having poor aim or winding up shooting in the wrong sort of direction. Definitely a very fortunate situation that no one was injured. This was obviously, first of all, firearm involved, and secondly, just the element of the vehicle is actually victim trying to get away, colliding with the other vehicle and losing control. It is very fortunate that they weren't injured.
Police are continuing to search for the two suspects, the shooter as well as the driver of the Ford pickup. They are also appealing to the public for any dash cam video that may help them in their investigation. Dwight?
Thank you, Kelda. Hamilton police have arrested and charged 4 people in relation to an investigation involving exporting stolen vehicles out of Canada. Police say the auto theft ring has been operating out of Hamilton for a couple of years now. At least 39 vehicles were stolen with a value of $1.6 million. Rental car companies across southern Ontario were targeted, with people using fraudulent documents to rent the vehicles, which they would never return, or they would clone the car keys so they could steal the vehicles later on. The investigation, dubbed Project Seagull, has recovered 7 vehicles bound for Iraq, but police believe many more have been shipped already. 4 people, 3 men and a woman, have been arrested and face several charges, including participation in activities of a criminal organization. Some downtown residents want their councillors to put the brakes on a plan to allow overnight permit parking on most residential streets. Right now, about 60% of roads qualify, but as Lisa Shing reports, the Toronto and East York Community Council voted last week to try to move closer to 100% coverage.
Parkdale High Park is just one of the downtown neighborhoods that has a bit of a mishmash when it comes to street parking. For example, the street right there requires permits if you want to park overnight. Though residents right there don't need one, and the city wants to change that. in the neighborhood, these streets already have overnight permit parking in place. A proposed plan would see these streets added, including Riverside Drive, a historic street by the Humber River. Residents here are afraid their quality of life will be disrupted.
This is backwards. This only adds more cars to the roads.
The plan would extend to almost every local road downtown, adding about 21,000 more parking spaces to the existing 50,000 overnight spots. Arterial streets like Jane Street here would be exempt, as would some others that are too narrow, but every other street would be fair game.
If you have less permit parking, less cars, you have less pollution, you have more community building, you have healthier environments, more cycling, more pedestrianization of all kinds, that's what we should be encouraging.
I and many people in the community want this done now.
Many residents have expressed their opposition at community meetings and via email, but this city councillor says others are supportive.
If we try to treat each street as its own little island that belongs to the people who live on it, you won't be able to drive to work.
The city has a blanket rule that states no one can park on a public road for more than 3 hours without a permit. But some roads are rarely patrolled, which means residents can park for free overnight unofficially. If City Council votes in favor of expanding permit parking next week, it could be 6 months to a year before the plan is implemented. Lisa Shank, CBC News, Toronto.
She's the North. She took the tennis world by storm, even beating Serena. Now it's game, set, march for our country's tennis star. More on Bianca Andreescu's historic Lou Marsh Award win coming up. And I know you're a fan too, and she deserves to be our Athlete of the Year after that run in 2019.
Yeah, so proud of her, really. That's exciting stuff. And so young, you know, it's amazing. Kind of amazing too, our temperatures. Now I'm gonna hold you in suspense. Our temperature's just gone up another few degrees. So I'm gonna tell you where we're sitting in a moment. I also have to tell you what's to come, because we're going to be seeing one of those kind of reversals in terms of we'll have our warmest temperature tomorrow early and then by the afternoon falling into the negatives. So the highs, when we look at these 2 degrees tomorrow, that's tomorrow morning. By tomorrow afternoon, we'll be at about -2. And then the temperature story beyond that is Wednesday, even in the afternoon, -3 will be out the best we could do. We get to turn around a little bit into Thursday, but still running below seasonal, and then we jump back up by Friday. So it's a real ride this week in terms of what we're going to be seeing and how you're going to be dressing and preparing for things. I know you needed to dress today, well, or at least carry with you an umbrella. We still have some of those showers, but they are weakening a little bit because we're getting into some breaks here around the GTA. So off and on, still through the midnight hour until 1, 2 in the morning, we'll be seeing some kind of wet conditions. But then the temperature begins to fall. And as it does, we're going to see those winds picking up over the lakes and getting into a situation where we'll have some snow squalls setting up. For now, it's in the liquid form, and there it is, the big reveal. We're at 9 degrees right now. Enjoy it while it lasts, because overnight tonight we go to 5, and then the temperature falls from there, and there you go, Dwight. Tomorrow afternoon, -2 with flurries coming back into our skies because of those snow squalls that set up.
9 degrees? You're the best, Colette. Thank you.
I am the best. Let's just stay right here in this moment in time.
We're taking it. Thank you, Colette. We'll check back with you later.
Sounds good.
Ontario's fiscal watchdog says we could see an almost balanced provincial budget by 2022, but that could mean spending almost $5 billion less than needed on health and education in the coming years.
Those are the 2 largest programs by far. They're also purely demand-driven. So if you are a government looking to rein in spending or to control spending, whatever word you want to use, you have to look at your biggest programs, and you have to understand the mechanics that drive the costs of those programs.
The Financial Accountability Officer, Peter Weltman, put out his annual budget report today. He projects an almost balanced budget by 2021-22 and a surplus in the following years, but that's if the government doesn't implement tax cuts that were promised during the election but haven't been announced yet. History will be made this hour at Queen's Park. The official portrait of former Premier Kathleen Wynne is about to be unveiled. Wynne's will be the first portrait of a woman to hang among past Ontario premiers and speakers. The unveiling will be done by Premier Doug Ford. Our Queen's Park reporter, Mike Crawley, has more.
On the walls of the legislature, a lesson in Ontario history. Life-size portraits of every premier, from the first, John S. Macdonald, through the late 1800s and early 1900s, and well into this century. Every single premier, a man.
Every time I see a group of school kids coming through, I want to say to them, and there's going to be a woman on the wall soon. It's really important to me that young girls see themselves reflected.
Kathleen Wynne's portrait was commissioned following her defeat in the last election.
Kathleen.
The current premier always presides over the unveiling. For Wynne, that means it's Doug Ford.
I am quite sure it's going to be a gracious event. We will rise above that partisanship. You know, Doug Ford and I don't agree on anything, really, but he is the premier, and it's the position. Again, it's the position that's important.
Honoring that position is why these portraits are painted to be displayed permanently at Queen's Park. The portraits stayed quite traditional all the way through the late 1980s, including this one of Bill Davis and that one of Frank Miller. But then David Peterson broke the mold. Peterson is the first premier not to wear a suit in his official portrait. His loosened tie, his rolled-up shirt sleeves, and a photo of his family in the background, also all firsts. The artist who painted Peterson also painted Wynne.
I wanted someone who could capture my expression, and I hope people think she has.
So much. Thank you so much. Merci.
Wynne chose a few personal objects to appear in her portrait. Photos of her family, including her wife, Jane Rounthwaite, gifts she received from Indigenous people, and her running shoes. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
We now have a better sense of when you might see cannabis edibles, extracts, and vapes in stores. A spokesperson for the Ontario Cannabis Store says they expect the products to be available for their online store and private retail stores by early next year. That's when they estimate the federal licensed products, or producers rather, will have them ready. Meanwhile, Toronto's Board of Health is calling on the provincial and federal government to implement stricter vaping regulations.
I think when e-cigarettes and vaping started, it was kind of seen as a novelty product and a harmless one, and one that might actually help with smoking cessation. But the more we learn, the worse it gets, and we discover that in no way is vaping benign.
The board is asking Ontario to ban vape advertising and the sale of flavors anywhere minors may be able to access them. They're also asking for a limit on the concentration of nicotine allowed in vape products. As for the province, they are urging them to tax vape products like tobacco products. The Chief Medical Officer of Health was also charged with looking into the impacts of a possible ban on vape products in Toronto. She will report back in 2020. Russia has been banned from competing in the world's top sporting events for the next 4 years. What that means for Russia's top athletes after the break.
The weather update is brought to you by Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
Russia has been banned from competing in the world's top sporting events for the next 4 years. That includes next summer's Tokyo Olympics and the 2020 World Cup. The World Anti-Doping Agency decision comes after an investigation found Russian authorities doctored and deleted lab evidence related to potential doping cases. Chris Brown has more on what it means now for Russia's athletes.
This ban is on the country, and it spares the athletes, which was the recommendation of the World Anti-Doping Agency's Executive Committee.
The decision is designed to punish the guilty parties and send the message that it will not be tolerated. It stands strong against those who cheated the system while protecting those who did not.
What it means is that Russia can't take part in the next 2 Olympic Games, nor can Russia host any other international sporting events. But clean athletes will be allowed to compete as neutrals. As for the FIFA World Cup, which is in Qatar in 2022, today WADA suggested if a Russian team qualifies for the world's largest soccer tournament, they won't be able to compete as Team Russia, but again, they'd have to field athletes as part of a neutral team. So, in theory, no national uniforms, no national anthem, just as what happened in South Korea in 2018. The blood and urine samples at the heart of this issue have been locked away for years in a Moscow lab, so there's no suggestion that athletes themselves tampered with the results. Instead, suspicion has fallen on Russia's security services and its Ministry of Sport, which was in control of the facility, that they did the tampering to try to continue with their cover-up of cheating that happened during the Sochi Olympics in 2014. Today, Russia's Prime Minister called the move part of Western anti-Russian hysteria. The sports minister went even further, saying there was zero tampering, and incredibly, he seemed to suggest that the head of Russia's anti-doping agency was to blame, in effect, deflecting this away from the Putin government without offering any proof. Very quickly, we've moved into the blame game. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
This will be my first general election that I'm able to vote in, and it's very exciting. I can't wait to do my duties as a citizen.
It's an election with big ramifications for Britain and the European Union, and who wins could come down to one group of voters, the youth. We'll take you to London for more after the break. The Ford government is proposing a range of reforms to the justice system. The legislation was tabled earlier this afternoon. Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley joins us live now with more. So, Mike, there's a lot in this bill, but one key focus is legal aid.
Yeah, and Dwight, you might recall that the government cut funding to Legal Aid Ontario earlier this year by about $130 million. That's 1/3 of its budget. Well, the government says this bill is going to free up Legal Aid Ontario to run its operation more efficiently. And here's the Attorney General, Doug Downey.
The intention is that the legislation would give Legal Aid Ontario the flexibility it needs to continue to provide high-quality legal aid services to low-income Ontarians, as part of our plan to improve the way the justice system operates day in and day out.
Now, the government was planning a further $30 million cut to the Legal Aid Ontario budget this coming year, but the government now says that that is not going to happen.
Mike, can you tell us how the changes will actually affect the legal aid system?
Yes, so Dwight, the government says that core legal aid services are going to be preserved, but I spoke to a duty counsel, someone who is also part of the union that represents legal aid lawyers, and she told me that the legislation would actually allow Legal Aid Ontario to stop providing certain legal aid services. That's because the agency would get the power to make its own decisions about what legal aid it actually provides. We also heard from the opposition NDP critic on this.
We're talking about legal aid clinics have been closed across the province, and people are unable to access the support they need. So I think what's clear is that there's been a negative impact, and what we need to see is a reversal of those cuts.
Now, these reforms do not directly address the backlog in the criminal court system that the Auditor General spoke about last week. Dwight?
Mike Crawley at Queen's Park tonight. Thank you, Mike. The United Kingdom is just days away from an election that will determine the future of Britain and its plan to leave the EU. Ahead of Thursday's vote, Tories have a lead over the Labour Party, but one group could have a big influence on the final outcome: young voters. Renee Filipponi heads to a London borough to get a glimpse of what candidates are facing in this high-stakes election.
I'm at a college north of London where they're holding a mock election. The crowds are all here to get the opportunity to quiz candidates from the various parties about the issues that matter to them. We have the Liberal Democrats here. There is a Labour candidate here as well. We know from polling that this group, this age category, cares about Brexit. They care about the health care service. They also really care about climate change. And then after they get the answers they want, they're going to cast a ballot.
What would you say are the good points of the Conservatives? Why should I vote for you guys? You're going to work hard and you'll achieve as much as you want to achieve. And we are the only party that will allow that. We're not going to, tax you.
The Conservative candidate takes a grilling from this crowd, and that's because young voters tend to skew to the left.
If you work with different organisations.
In the past, Labour has won a lion's share of their support, and the party is pushing this demographic hard.
We've got a really hopeful, outward-looking, positive manifesto that really inspires a lot of young people to vote.
What's your last name? For students, this voting exercise is a warm-up for the real thing on Thursday.
Thank you for voting.
This was my first general election that I'm able to vote in, and it's very exciting. I can't wait to do my duties as a citizen.
The event organizer is just 17. She can't vote yet, but is pushing her friends to get engaged.
There's no point in complaining that there's no change and that you feel like people don't care if you're not voting, because you're not going to find out what the outcome is unless you vote.
And after counting up the ballots, the results, well, they were as expected.
And Labour, 153. My good gosh.
A large number of young voters have registered for the first time this election, which means their vote could change the outcome. But what will matter is whether or not they show up on December 12th. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Barnet, UK.
It is a total denial if you don't take time to heal from something so dramatic.
Health struggles both personally and in her family. It was a difficult 2019 for Canadian soprano Misha Bruegel-Gossman. I sit down with her for an intimate conversation on how she got through it all, coming up after a look at weather. weather's looking pretty good when it comes to the temps anyway, Colin.
Yeah, it's all right. We've got a pretty decent evening ahead of us, Dwight, because we hold on to the mild air for a little while longer, and we're seeing less in terms of the wet weather. Now, there's still showers out there, no question about it, and we'll take a look at the radar, and that's illustrated there, but it's getting a little better. So the showers will taper off completely through the overnight hours, so that means we'll see things drying up a little bit in the short term anyway. Winds will be increasing. That's going to set up some snow squalls, and with those, tomorrow afternoon we get into some flurries coming back into our skies. Yes, not rain showers, turns to the other stuff, and the temperature falling through the day tomorrow and becoming a little chillier for a few days, in fact. So we're going to be going in the other direction. It's St. Catharines at 11 degrees, taking the cake right now. Windsor at 10 and Sarnia at 10, but Toronto, hey, we're not doing too bad, sitting at 9 degrees. Hamilton as well. That southwesterly flow as the front is going to be coming through. It's once it does, the winds turn more towards the west and they start to fall off. Those westerly winds, those set up some of these squalls because that cooler air coming across that relatively warmer water of the lake is going to be providing enough moisture and then cooling for squalls of 5, 10, even possibly 15 centimeters, highly localized. There are the rain showers that we're seeing at the moment, not just through the GTA, but into cottage country, and then the cooler air back here well to the west still, but that's what's coming through as we go through the overnight hours. Then the squalls begin. They will get more intense tomorrow later in the day, but into Wednesday, we're going to see those winds changing more towards the southwest again, and that will shift those squalls, anything that's left anyway, to different areas. So at least gives you a bit of a break. But in each case, both Tuesday and Wednesday, that chance of getting those flurries coming right down towards the city. So the temperature's looking like this into the early overnight, but then by tomorrow morning, the temperature will fall to about 2 degrees. By tomorrow afternoon, we're talking about the temperatures being around -2 to -3 with more clouds and flurries. Wednesday's high -3, a cool overnight into Thursday. We don't really see those temperatures going in that other direction till we get to the end of the week, headed into the weekend. Highs closer to 4 degrees then, Dwight.
Thank you, Colette.
You're welcome.
Misha Bruegel-Gossman is in town this week to perform a series of holiday concerts with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. It will be a celebration after what has been a difficult year for her, one of loss, heartbreak, and emergency open-heart surgery. Today, I sat down with the soprano to talk about how she's overcoming those challenges.
I felt like I was just through this last heart episode being repositioned so that it's the best excuse ever to cancel having a heart attack and having your father die, and then your mother also gets cancer after all of the treatments. Like, it was like this trifecta of opportunity for gratitude and just peace. You know, you just have to take your minute. And if you don't, people will be really upset with you, first of all, if you don't take your minute, because it is a total denial if you don't take time to heal from something so dramatic. Any one of those things would be grounds for retreat. But all three happening to me inside of a month, and then the month before my father died, my divorce went through. So then that's a kind of death, which you also have to deal with. But God knows I love symmetry. So give me all the hardship at once so that I'm not constantly having to recover from something. Just give it to me all at once.
Let's go back to the eve of this surgery.
Yeah.
And that Facebook post kind of went viral. And you wrote, "I'm filled with joy." And how could you possibly feel like that with what you were facing and what was in front of you?
Well, life is always at stake. I think we're always living in a consequential time, no matter what the risk. I think what we have been blessed with as Canadians, kind of being literally in the 1% of the world, like we live in an extremely luxurious state. I'm sitting in a hospital bed that I don't have to pay for, being given a cutting-edge surgery that won't render me and my children homeless. Like, I feel like I'm in the center of this incredible blessing, and I didn't die. You know, so it's just a blessing on blessing heaped on itself. And I understand that it is still open heart surgery, but I have been chosen for this path, and I'm not going to be caught ungrateful at any moment. Like, it doesn't mean that I don't have days where I feel isolated or lonely, or I have my own portion of shame about things that I would love to be able to repeat, or not, you know, who's this crazy woman screaming right now? Like, I have real issues, but I felt like in this moment it was an honest to God opportunity.
Part of what makes it incredible is that not only were you going through what you were physically going through, but you were also grieving the loss of your father.
My father on the east coast of the country was dying of the same thing that I was suffering from on the west coast of the country, and people have asked me if perhaps he would have in some way given up what he had or what remained of him to send the strength to me. Now, I don't know if that is a thing that happens, but I absolutely believe that's possible. Like, that is a move that is such a Sterling Gosman move, I can't even tell you. Yeah, in a heartbeat. And I know now as a parent that it would be no question that I would do that for my sons.
So, how did she get back that iconic voice? We'll have more with Misha tomorrow on our show. Here's a preview.
My voice is my singing voice, my job, my calling, my profession is very loyal, and I am loyal to it. I have been blessed by so many things as a result of having been entrusted with this gift. I look forward to the times that we rebuild together, you know.
They shelled out hundreds to repair their cars, only to find out there was a recall already issued. Our Go Public team looks into what drivers can do when that happens, and why, despite having the power to force a recall, Transport Canada has yet to do so. That's coming up next. Canada is charging Volkswagen for allegedly importing cars that company executives knew violated emission standards. The German automaker is facing 58 charges of violating the Canadian Environmental Protection Act for bringing in 128,000 cars into Canada with illegal emissions between 2008 and 2015. Volkswagen is also facing 2 charges for providing misleading information. The case comes more than 4 years after VW admitted to installing software on 11 million cars to trick emissions equipment into finding the cars ran more cleanly than they actually did. For that, they were fined more than $4 billion. Volkswagen will be in court on these new Canadian charges on Friday. Now, 83,000 VW vehicles were recalled as part of the original settlement at no cost to consumers. But as this next story shows, that's not always the case. So imagine shelling out thousands on a repair only to find out there's a recall on the part. As Rosa Marcatelli from our Go Public team found out, some automakers are telling drivers they're not covered.
That's the sound of the second engine Rick Lingard had to pay to put into his 2011 Hyundai Tucson after experiencing 2 complete engine failures within just weeks. He's on the hook for both, despite the SUV being part of a major recall that was issued before the breakdowns.
I'm out $8,700 almost for engines and towing and all that kind of stuff.
When Lingard contacted Hyundai about the breakdowns, he said no one mentioned anything about a recall. He only learned about the recall when he got the official notice in the mail, the one car makers are legally obligated to send. Hyundai didn't inspect either engine, but it rejected Lingard's claim anyway, saying the first breakdown was caused by too few oil changes and the second engine wouldn't be covered either because it wasn't inspected or installed by Hyundai.
That's really disappointing.
Donna Stewart and Scott Wild are fighting the same battle with Hyundai's sister company, Kia. The engine in their 2013 Sportage needed replacing after also failing at high speeds. Despite a recall, they too aren't covered.
Almost pleaded with them saying that, how can this be that our vehicle is not on the list?
Kia says the couple's engine model differs from the ones under recall, and they couldn't prove how often the oil was changed. An automotive consumer advocate says using oil changes as a reason to deny claims is common but puzzling, since the car makers have already acknowledged in some cases the problem is caused by debris left in the engines during manufacturing.
So whether you did oil changes or not, the debris was already there.
More than a year ago, Transport Canada was given the power to force recalls, but it's never used it. So car companies still dictate when to recall and who will be covered. Drivers say Transport Canada needs to do more.
Transport Canada have told us unless there's a fatality, a lot of stuff does not happen. Man, that's way too late.
The Transportation Authority is looking into 65 complaints about being left out of the Hyundai and Kia recalls. Stewart and Wild's case is among them. The couple is now waiting to see what, if anything, the agency does about it. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
What I love about Nicole, she's a great dancer, infectious.
The nominees for this year's Golden Globes have been announced. Marriage Story leads the way with 6, including for Best Film Drama. Eli joins us after the break to break down the best in TV and cinema. That's coming up. Stay with us. It's game, set, march for Bianca Andreescu. She's Canada's top athlete for 2019, winning the Lou Marsh Award. Andreescu is making history today, the first tennis player to ever win the award. Not a surprise, though, as she was the first Canadian to win a Grand Slam singles title. Greg Ross has more from the star herself after her big win.
The accolades continue to pile up for Bianca Andreescu.
Having my name amongst all these amazing athletes is just surreal.
After becoming the first Canadian to win a tennis Grand Slam at the U.S. Open in September, Andreescu is now the first tennis player to ever win the Lou Marsh Award.
Yeah, this year has just been crazy all around, many ups and downs.
But clearly more ups than downs, which included her first WTA title in March at Indian Wells. In August, she came back home to capture the Rogers Cup here in Toronto. And then in September, the biggest win of her life at the U.S. Open.
It's one of the biggest stages in tennis, one of the biggest crowds, lover of sports too. But I did hear a lot of Canadians out there, and I don't think if it wasn't for them, then I don't think I would have accomplished what I've accomplished.
Well, it really was a historic year.
Damian Cox is the executive director of the Lou Marsh Trophy Committee. He says while voters took all of Andreescu's accomplishments into consideration, her win in New York is what made this decision unanimous.
First unanimous decision since I've been involved. Usually it's a brawl. I mean, you would not believe the intensity of the discussions and the arguments. But this one, everybody just sort of looked around at each other and said, who else but Bianca? And that's the way it went.
Her win at the U.S. Open captured the imagination of Canadians like no other athlete this year.
But what Bianca did this year was so above and beyond. And I think what really got the voters this year was how she captured the attention and affection of the entire country. Everybody was watching on September 7th when she was taking on Serena Williams in the U.S. Open final. And that's probably what carried the day.
And now her name is not only up there with the greatest tennis players of all time, this award puts her up there with Canada's greatest athletes of all time.
But I'm just beyond proud, and yeah, let's keep it going, right?
Greg Ross, CBC News, Toronto.
The nominations for the 77th annual Golden Globes were announced today. The awards honor the best in film and television around the world as judged by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association.
Best Motion Picture Drama, 1917, The Irishman, Joker, Marriage Story, The Two Popes.
The winners will be announced January 5th. Ricky Gervais will host the event for the 5th time. Eli Glasner is here with the details, and we'll start with what stands out for you, Eli.
Netflix.
Yes, nomination.
Streaming, 34 nominations altogether if you add up television and film. And so what we've been talking about, how the landscape of the industry is changing, it's here, it's changed. I mean, this is the new era. That is remarkable. So let me start with the most nominated film from this morning with 6 nominations. We're looking at Marriage Story, available for you to screen right now on your Netflix if you're a subscriber, and many of us are. This had 6 nominations. That's Scarlett Johansson playing woman divorcing from Adam Driver, so they were in love, not so much. It's a kind of a procedural, but how they try to get divorced, and it starts amicable and then not so amicable. Let's move on to a movie I've talked about a lot. The Irishman. Sure, you can go see it at the Lightbox, but many of you are probably seeing it at home because it's also on Netflix, and it may be 3.5 hours long, but maybe you got a nomination for each of those hours plus more. It has 5 nominations altogether, not for De Niro, but Joe Pesci and Al Pacino both nominated. I'll talk more about that in a little bit, but a lot of nominations for Martin Scorsese's Irishman, including the director himself. So great to see. Let's move on to a movie I haven't really talked about much, but another Netflix creation, The Two Popes. There you go. 2 remarkable actors playing a more conservative pope and then the changing of the guard as the new, more progressive pope comes in. This is a movie also on Netflix. A lot of talk, a lot of dialogue. I don't know if a major studio would even fund this, but a number of nominations for it today, including acting awards. And then, speaking of acting and a big actor, let's move on to Dolomite now. Golden Globes like to split between comedy and drama, so this is in the best comedy category. But Eddie Murphy back, such a great return for him, playing the guy who brought Dolomite to life. So a movie about making a movie. I think it's some of the best things Eddie's done in a while. On the Globe, I think voters were laughing right along. They nominated Eddie for his performance and for best comedy. So again, as I mentioned, we've got Netflix, 17 nominations altogether. And it's not just that streaming studio. Apple Plus just came online a little while ago, and already let's look at the TV category for the morning show. Another interesting contest. Jennifer Aniston is going to be competing against her co-star. There she is, Reese Witherspoon, for this very brand new TV show. I think some of us are still catching up, but I guess they got those links out to the voters, and it's in the running this morning.
These streaming services are supposed to bring down our cable bills. There's so many of them now that it's all adding up again. Okay.
I know.
Best supporting actor or actress. Like this role, a lot of buzz around it.
Yeah, I want to take a look. Let's start by the supporting actor category, because as I mentioned, I mean, this race, honestly, people, I don't know what to say. Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, Al Pacino in The Irishman as Jimmy Hoffa, Joe Pesci as De Niro's friend there, and then Brad Pitt playing this stunt man who's got this just amazing fountain of charisma, and then as I mentioned, Anthony Hopkins.
Legends.
Playing the Pope. Yeah, like, who do you...
Legends.
I don't know. I mean, everyone loves Hanks, so maybe, but it's Brad Pitt.
Kind of cute, that one, yeah.
It's tough. It's
Hopkins
tough.
is one of the best.
I don't know. So let's move on. We'll take a look at the ladies, which is, I think, it's a different race, but also very tight. I want to point this out because I'm so happy. Jennifer Lopez in there.
She was so good in Hustlers.
She was so good in Hustlers, and it's more than just the glitz and glam. It's great to see her get attention for her acting chops. And then you got Margot Robbie for Bombshell. You got Annette Bening for The Report. Kathy Bates for Richard Jewell. That opens this Friday from Clint Eastwood. And Laura Dern, again, Marriage Story. Dern plays this divorce lawyer. She comes on the screen, and she just dominates. It is remarkable. And so there you go. Some real tough calls there.
We'll be watching. Thanks, Eli.
You're welcome.
As we told you earlier, the portrait of former Premier Kathleen Wynne has just been unveiled. We'll give you another look after the break. Stay with us. And there you have it, Premier Doug Ford and Lieutenant Governor of Ontario unveiling the portrait of former Premier Kathleen Wynne just moments ago. Before the portrait was shown, Ford said a few words, adding that he did something special for the former Premier today.
Well, Kathleen and I may not always see eye to eye on things. And I'm so sincere when I say this, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the incredible passion and the drive she brings every single day to Queen's Park. And Kathleen, I wore my special red tie just for you, okay?
As you heard earlier, the event makes history at Queen's Park. It's the first time a woman's portrait will hang on the walls of the legislature among the paintings of past Ontario premiers and speakers. Colette, we can both say it's about time.
It is about time, and a nice portrait of her, too. So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations to our former premier. So, weather. Temperatures are good.
Now.
Okay, let me shut up and let you continue because you have the forecast.
No, but you're quite right. You know, temperature's very mild at the moment. It's 9 degrees out there. Through the overnight, they remain relatively mild as our showers taper off, 5 degrees. But by tomorrow morning, so think 7, 8 a.m., they'll be around 2. And then they don't come back up through the day tomorrow. They actually continue to fall. So this front passing through, and behind it, we'll have that cooler air in place. So -2, some snow squalls, and there are watches in the lee of Lake Huron right now and around Georgian Bay for many communities. And some of those flurries may well make their way down into the GTA. So that's why I put the cloud cover in, some flurry activity into tomorrow afternoon. And then Wednesday, the winds change direction again. So it'll at least move those snow squalls out of those areas.
We don't want the snow squalls. That's it for us tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night, everybody.